Tell us about your family situation. Where are your family when it comes to that part of the world?
So my mother is Palestinian. Her family primarily come from Jerusalem. We're a very old Jerusalemite family, Christian Palestinians, who are now spread to Ramallah and Jericho. But these are cousins of my mother who live in Gaza. They live in a section called Al-Rimal, which is in Gaza City itself. And what we've heard, which has been heartbreaking, is that first their house was bombed, so they couldn't stay there. They went to their church, and that's where they're sheltering. And I very much, of course, hoped that they'd managed to get out, but we've understood that they feel they've nowhere to go. It's 3 generations in one family, and the eldest, he's very old. We're heartbroken to think that they are right now in Gaza City, and every morning I wake up and seek an update from that side of the family. It's really, really very difficult to think about what they're going through.
And where could they go, Layla? Because presumably, at best, they could go south, I suppose. But do they feel that ultimately, even south, they're not going to necessarily be safe?
Exactly that. So first of all, what transport? There's no fuel. There's no mobile phones. So we're getting the updates because they're very much rationing, turning on the phone, giving an update, turning it off, because there's no electricity. And this is, what I'm just heartbroken about. This is a humanitarian crisis that is unfolding at the same time. They shouldn't be paying the price for what Hamas has done, the atrocities that Hamas has clearly committed. And what they are worried about, and I think a lot of Palestinians in Gaza are worried about, is, there were convoys of people traveling south, which were also bombarded and people died. When you go there, again, no mobile phones. So what are you meant to do? So what we need internally in Gaza, if this is what needs to happen, there needs to be humanitarian corridors. We need to turn the electricity and the water back on. I mean, this doesn't make any sense that that's happening. And of course, I understand Israel is saying they're doing this so that Hamas release the hostages. Hamas should just release the hostages. That's an obvious thing that needs to happen. But it shouldn't be contingent. The humanity of one people shouldn't be contingent on Hamas. We know that Hamas do not have humanity in their heart, and it just pains me to think that, what would you do in that situation yourself? I don't know if they're going to be there tomorrow. I mean, I don't know if the bombardment starts and there is no guarantee that churches are even safe. Are they going to be alive? It's heartbreaking.
Richard Burgon, the Labour MP, called the collective punishment of Gazans a war crime in Parliament yesterday. John Healey just came on for Labour saying he thought he was wrong about that. What do you think?
Look, I'm not a human rights lawyer, and there are those who are in the UN, for example, as called. There's elements of what is happening that they are deeply worried about. The WHO said that the forced evacuation of hospitals, for example, children on ventilators who literally can't be moved, is and I think they use the words potential breach of international humanitarian law. Wherever that is happening, it should not be happening. 2 wrongs simply don't make a right. And from my perspective, it is just morally wrong that families like mine, Palestinian families who have nothing to do with Hamas, we need to make this really, really clear. And also the suggestion that they're in any way listening to Hamas by staying there. They're not moving because they have nowhere to go. They don't feel they have anywhere to go. They are vulnerable themselves. They aren't able to go. And they aren't pawns in this. They are making decisions for themselves. And the sad truth of the matter is they would prefer to shelter in a sanctuary of a church that they know, with people they know. I think that's very understandable. So let's put our humanity first in this situation. And what I was urging the Prime Minister to do, what I'm urging all world leaders to do, and anyone who just is looking at this in terror themselves, wondering how we got to this point, is recognize that this has been going on for generations. It's happened, the whole of this kind of terror has been happening the whole of my life, the whole of my mother's life, whole of my grandfather's life. It's time for this to stop. And the only way through this now is a political solution, is to find a way to deliver 2 states for 2 peoples, so that when we say never again, we actually mean it this time. And it needs the West, it needs Britain, who were involved in the British Mandate back in the early 20th century. We have a responsibility here. I urged the Prime Minister yesterday to take it upon himself that when he said never again, this time we really mean it.
Do you have confidence, though, that that's a very long way away, it feels, a 2-state solution? But even now, do you feel confident that Israel will heed the calls to be proportionate? Because we have a lot of people representing the Israeli government on this program, and they talk about proportionality, they talk about adhering to the rule of law. But for your family, do you feel confident that will mean that they won't be bombed out of a church?
No, don't we? And
therefore, what do those assurances mean then?
That doesn't mean to say that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself against Hamas. It does. But there has to be a distinction made, and this is why the international humanitarian law was created, was to protect civilians first. That's what it's there for. So Biden is going. There has been words said, and I think Biden himself said, the difference between terrorists and democratic states is that democratic states do adhere to international humanitarian law, also known as the rules of war. So I sincerely hope that he's there to first make sure the aid gets in, encourage them to follow the letter of that law. But I'm deeply, deeply concerned for the safety of not just my family, but all of those innocent Palestinians, and also those innocent Israelis who are being held there, who are elsewhere, who are also scared. I mean, the sad fact of the matter is we have so much in common now with our grief and our loss. I went to a vigil held by my local Jewish community, and there were Israelis there. We have to now say we don't want this anymore, and it's for us. We don't just leave it to them. This is Palestine is occupied. This has been a long-standing conflict, which has got worse and worse over the last few years. We have to make it stop now. Now is the time. And yes, 2 states may feel a long way away, but we have to say that it's going to happen, and then we have to do something about it. And that's the difference, because the last 10 years, basically nothing has been done. Yeah. The West has basically stepped back from the region more generally, and Palestine and Israel in particular. And I think now, we need to have this wake-up call. Never again. Let's mean it this time. Let's do it this time. And let's make sure that we lead from the front in it.